The Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, seeks to provide for a press that is free to observe and criticize the workings of government. But equally important, it seeks to provide a judicial system which offers the greatest possible security for individual freedom. The Bill of Rights guarantees a fair and swift trial by a jury for anyone charged with a crime. In recent years, the free press and the judicial system, each attempting to fulfill its historic and constitutional responsibilities, have sought in a variety of ways to resolve and accommodate apparent conflicts arising from the parallel rights conferred by the Constitution: the right to a fair trial, the right to a free and unencumbered press.
A number of small fires lit the sky just before dawn this morning around the Randalls Point nuclear plant near Ridgewood as demonstrators
Violence
protesting
erupted last night during a demonstration at Randalls Point nuclear plant and continued into the early morning hours today, leaving one policeman in serious condition
at the Randalls Point nuclear plant this morning. For nearly 7 hours, police and firemen
What do you want from me, Frank? Hell, you've got a dozen kids in the tank now.
I want a search warrant from you, Greg. Those newspaper people took so many stills the other night, you would have thought it was Christmas. I want those pictures. All of them. I want to see faces, especially the ones that started it. It was a setup. And the proof I need's in their files. I can smell it.
I don't get it, Frank. Well, there's the phone. You want the number?
I want a warrant. Now. You don't think they're just going to hand that stuff over to me, do you? If I call them up, the stuff we need is going to start to disappear.
You don't know that, Frank. Besides, Judge Royce doesn't hand out fishing licenses. I call him up and ask for a warrant, he's going to laugh me off the phone. The best thing I can do is go for a subpoena. Give them a chance to argue their case in court before you start rummaging through their files.
Now, don't start waving the Constitution at me, Greg. This stuff is essential to our investigation. We're not going to go in there and turn the place inside out. We're not stormtroopers. But I want the rest of those pictures. Look, if I'm right, we can settle this thing right now.
Frank, forget the warrant. Our best chance is to go for the subpoena.
Ah, bring us a bad tidings. Okay, what's the story? I understand we got a little fan mail from our friends in blue.
Well, they're groping, Mark. The subpoena wants everything Mel shot at Randall Point Tuesday night. They want all his notes, and they want to know who tipped us off. They think they smell a setup.
We're not going to do it, are we? I mean, give them everything?
Oh, naturally, we'll move to quash the subpoena. They'll fight it. The precedents are on our side, but it all depends on the judge.
What does that mean? Isn't the law clear enough?
Nothing's ever clear enough, Mark. You know that. The judge could side with the DA if he thinks the evidence goes to the heart of the case. The police will take the position that they have no other sources available to them. Huh? It could go the other way. I don't think so. But you know judges. As my first law professor used to say, never try and predict the weather or a judicial decision.
Oh, great. This could turn into a bloody siege. Okay, Mel, pull it all together and turn it over to Les. We better be prepared for the worst.
That's everything, Mel. Don't throw out or destroy anything. Not even the empty film cans. We can't afford to miss anything they might consider evidence.
Whatever you say. I don't have to like it, though.
No, you just have to do it. Any questions, you check with Les.
Okay. You know, we were just working on a tip. It was nothing crazy. It was late, slow. We just went for it.
No, Mel, I know. Just get the stuff together. Hang on a minute, Les. Look, let's go over this whole thing.
I'm telling you, Frank, there is nothing I can do. We wait. They'll fight the subpoena, and we'll get our day in court.
Great. And in the meantime, I grow old and gray, and the stuff we need disappears.
In the meantime, we prove that what we're after is absolutely material and relevant to the main issue here. Without that, we're dead in the water. There's absolutely no other alternative. You know, there's an old French proverb, Frank, evil to him who thinks evil. Hey, let's not assume our friends at the paper are bad guys.
It was a setup, Greg. Any idiot could see that. What about our rights? What about the rights of the public? What about the rights of the cop who gets hurt doing his job? We've all got rights, Greg. Nobody wants to take responsibility.
It's not a simple issue, Frank. We'll argue the point before the judge.
That's not
Look, I gotta go. You need a lift?
Yeah, I need a lift, but I got a feeling I'm not going to get it.
Although the constitutional rights of a free press and a fair trial may at times appear in conflict, the continuing efforts of the press and the bar working together to resolve these complex issues have often been successful. Consider an actual case history. In 1971, a group of students demonstrated at Stanford University Hospital and engaged in a physical struggle with the police. 2 days later, the police, armed with a search warrant, went to the offices of the Stanford Daily, a newspaper, looking for unpublished photographs they believed could help them identify those who injured several policemen. The newspaper sued the district attorney, arguing that a subpoena rather than a warrant should have been issued because a subpoena can be challenged in court before it is enforced. A warrant offers no such rebuttal. It is simply an authorization to search for and seize potential evidence without the consent of the individual or organization involved. The Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution did not prevent police officers from obtaining warrants and making unannounced searches of newspaper offices for evidence. This decision had a chilling effect on newsrooms all over America, and the press and the bar together set about to resolve the issues raised. On October the 1st, 1980, the Congress passed a bill that barred federal, state, and local law enforcement officers from using warrants to search newsrooms except in certain specific circumstances. In most cases, law officers were required to obtain a subpoena. This action by Congress forcefully and decisively responded to the threat to freedom of the press as protected in the Constitution. It also demonstrated the ability of the system to resolve issues of this kind. The issuance of a subpoena gives the press the opportunity to argue its case before any action is taken. It also gives the law enforcement agency a chance to prove that there are no other means of gathering needed evidence. The subpoena also sets limits on what can and cannot be obtained. The judge can then determine what, if any, action can be taken.
Counselor, I've reviewed your papers, so you can assume my familiarity with the facts. If you have any other points you'd like to make, you may do so. Miss Brock?
Your Honor, we have the responsibility of investigating a crime. The evidence we gather will be an essential part of ensuring both a fair trial and that justice is served. We have good reason to believe that the newspaper has information essential to our investigation. Photographs which will support our contention of aggravation on the part of the demonstrators. Without all the pictures that were taken, we cannot proceed effectively with our work. The public gets shortchanged. Frankly, and I honestly hope you won't take offense, Mr. Meyer, but we are very concerned over the delay that has already taken place. And it's hindering effect on the development of our case. Let's not waste any more time, Mr. Miner. I really don't think there are any grounds for quashing the subpoena.
Well, that is what we're here to decide, right, Miss Brock? Mr. Miner, would you care to respond?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Miss Brock apparently takes great liberties in her interpretation of our First Amendment responsibilities to the public. It is our mandate to keep the public informed. fact of the matter is that the free press in this country cannot be forced to serve as an investigative arm of a public agency. If we allow ourselves to give up some information here, it can only become increasingly difficult for the press to gather information, written or photographic.
Anything else, Mr. Miner?
Yes, one more point, Your Honor. We are not adversaries here, Miss Brock. However, it is extremely important in cases such as these that the press remain a last resort as a source of potential evidence. Now, if you think we are in collusion with someone charged with a crime, say so. Bring charges. But at the same time, remember, in your zeal to exercise your public trust to serve and protect, we also bear a public trust, no less important. In this case, it is our contention that you have not exhausted other reasonable alternatives in gathering the evidence you seek, such as interviewing all the witnesses present at Randall Point at the time of the alleged beating. We do not work for the police department. We cannot be expected to open our files every time the process of investigation reaches an impasse. The end result can only make it impossible for us to continue the flow of information to the public. And that is our job.
Thank you, Mr. Miner. Anything to add, Miss Brock?
No, Your Honor, but we still hold that the subpoena is justified and very necessary. And without those pictures, our job will be 10 times as difficult, if not impossible.
There's no doubt in my mind, Miss Brock, that what you're requesting here challenges the role of a free press as the eyes and ears of the public. Mr. Miner is quite right in suggesting that if the press is perceived to be an arm of any governmental investigative agency, its constitutional role cannot help but be compromised. On the other hand, we must also examine the potential here for exception due to the peculiar circumstances surrounding this case. Specifically, the apparent lack of alternative sources of conclusive evidence available, and the relevance of these materials in question to the issues at hand. I'm going to wait until I've had the opportunity to examine the evidence in question before making any decision. Mr. Miner, please ask your client to send the pictures, all of them, to my chambers this afternoon.
Another important issue arising from the parallel rights granted by the First and Sixth Amendments is closure, restricting press and public media from attending certain aspects of trial proceedings, including pre-trial hearings, pre-trial jury selection, and the trial itself.
Would you please expand on that, Counselor? I'm not sure I understand the reasons for your motion.
Your Honor, the defense contends that the right of my client to a fair trial will be seriously compromised by the presence of the press during jury selection and questioning. Our purpose here is to select an unbiased jury, one as free from any preconceptions about this case, conscious or subconscious, as is humanly possible. Now, in order to do that, we must create a setting here in this courtroom which will allow us to elicit from each potential juror a level of intimate thinking and frank testimony which we cannot achieve in an atmosphere which is fraught with the possibility that their words will become tomorrow's headlines. Therefore, we ask the court close this hearing to exclude everyone who is not directly involved with this part of the trial process.
Aren't you making some unwarranted assumptions regarding the quality of press coverage?
We don't think so, Your Honor, based on what's already been written. The climate is all wrong. The jury can't help but be influenced by this kind of reporting. We believe this is a proper case for closure.
How do you feel about this, Mr. Fulton?
The
prosecutor has no strong feelings one way or the other, Your Honor.
Then if I understand you correctly, Mr. Armand, you're requesting that we close the courtroom to everyone except the participants and the potential jurors.
Yes, Your Honor. My client's right to a fair trial must be the court's first concern.
All right. I'll consider it. I will want to hear from the press on this before the court rules. Recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
We consider this an absolute violation of the First Amendment, Your Honor. There's absolutely no evidence that the defendant's right to a fair trial will indeed be compromised. And secondly, the role of the press to represent the public in observing and reporting on the functions of government is nowhere more important than in the administration of justice. If you prevent the press from being present at this or any other part of these proceedings, you are conducting government in secret. And the public is deaf and blind.
Counselor?
Your Honor, we believe the court's concern must be first to ensure my client a fair trial. I have already stated our reasons for requesting closure. I don't think there's anything to add.
Closure of criminal trials, pretrial jury selection, and pretrial hearings has been one of the most difficult questions facing the courts for years. Looking at a series of actual cases will help clarify the issues involved. In July of 1980, the Supreme Court rendered a decision in the case of Richmond Newspapers versus Virginia, which settled the most basic point in question. The case involved a murder trial in which the defendant requested closure in order to keep the jury and the remaining witnesses from being influenced by information reported outside the courtroom. The prosecutor agreed to the motion. The Richmond Newspapers did not. The judge expelled the press and completed the trial in secret. Richmond carried its case to the Supreme Court, where the justices ruled 7-1 in favor of the press as public surrogate, granting it the right to attend all criminal trials. In the words of Justice John Paul Stevens, "For the first time, the court unequivocally holds that any arbitrary interference with access to information is an abridgment of freedom of speech and the press as protected by the First Amendment." Once the Richmond decision was made, all subsequent decisions favoring public access to pretrial jury selection and pretrial hearings became logical, evolutionary steps towards openly presenting the complete judicial process to the public. One of the first remaining watershed decisions came about in January of 1984. It was a result of a California rape-murder trial, which excluded the press from a 6-week portion of the jury selection process and withheld transcripts of the proceedings. Press Enterprise, a California newspaper, unsuccessfully fought the decision through the state courts before it finally presented its case to the United States Supreme Court. Cognizant of the time-worn adage that the trial of a case is half over once the jury has been selected, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that jury selection is part of the trial process and therefore included under First Amendment right of access. In April of 1984, the U.S. Court of Appeals overturned a federal district court decision concerning the closure of pretrial hearings. This decision helped to remove one of the last barriers restricting access to the complete judicial process. The case is referred to as the application of the Herald Company. It was particularly important because it clearly held the First Amendment right of access also extends to pretrial hearings concerning the admissibility of evidence. Up until that time, the only Supreme Court ruling involving closure of this kind of hearing favored closure on the grounds of the defendant's Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial. Herald does not rule out closure, nor could it as a lower court decision. What it does is define the middle ground on which both rights to a fair trial and access can be exercised by promoting alternatives to the extreme action of closure, such as extensive pretrial questioning of prospective jurors to determine their exposure to information that could prejudice their judgment.
Do you feel that anything you have read or seen concerning this case will prevent you from fulfilling your duty as a juror?
No.
In other words, will you be able to arrive at a decision?
You are further instructed that in arriving at your decision in this case, You are to rely solely on information presented in this courtroom.
In addition, the judge may instruct the jury to ignore anything they might have heard outside the courtroom during the trial. Finally, there are the more extensive measures of moving the trial to a new location,
or providing a place for the jury to stay, and even delaying the proceedings, all to limit the potential effects of press coverage. Today, only under the most extreme circumstances and only by the strictest procedural standards are criminal cases closed. And even then, the public and the press must be given an opportunity to be heard on the question of their exclusion. The press and the bar agree that the messages of Richmond through Herald indicate that closure of pretrial hearings, pretrial jury selection, and trial proceedings is a last resort that can and should be avoided.
Mr. Forrest, could you tell the court when and how you first knew there would be a demonstration at Randall's Point?
I'd prefer not to answer that.
Your Honor, would the court instruct the witness to respond?
Is there any specific reason for your refusal to answer, Mr. Forrest?
It's a question of sources, Your Honor. The attorney is trying to find out how we knew, and I can't tell him that.
If my client is to have a fair trial, Your Honor, we need to find out who arranged for the arrival of the press and where the information came from so we can question that source. We have the right to question under oath anyone who may have organized that demonstration. And we're not fishing. This information is important to our case.
Mr. Forrest, are you refusing to answer the question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you realize the court can hold you in contempt?
I do.
The right of a reporter to shield his sources is critical to his ability to gather information. Revealing an informant in court would most certainly eliminate that individual as a future source of information. Worse yet, such an incident could have a chilling effect on others who might be inclined to come forward under confidential circumstances. And yet, what of the situation where identification of sources appears critical to an individual's right to a fair trial?
More recently, the issue was dramatically raised in the case of the New York Times versus Jaskalovich. A reporter for the New York Times investigated a series of suspicious deaths in a New Jersey hospital. A physician named Jaskalovich was brought to trial for the murders, and the defense claimed that the reporter, Myron Farber, had supplied the prosecution with an important part of the evidence. The defense demanded that Farber and the Times turn over notes and tapes and answer questions about the case. The judge asked to see the material to review it in private. Farber and the Times refused, claiming protection under a state statute that shields reporters and their sources. Civil contempt charges were brought against both the Times and the reporter. Farber served 40 days in jail. The Times paid $285,000 in fines. Farber appealed to the New Jersey Supreme Court. It ruled that Farber's documents were necessary to a fair trial. It held that our adversary system of justice demands that both the defendant and the prosecutor be able to present all the facts that support their sides of a given issue. Farber maintained that the process of editing materials for publication comes under the protection of the First Amendment. Newsmen, under their right of freedom of the press, claim freedom to develop a story, releasing or withholding whatever information they feel necessary to inform the public. They argue that the freedom to decide what to publish is the essence of freedom of the press. They also defend the confidentiality of their sources as privileged and essential to their ability to carry out their work. The questions raised are difficult, not easy to resolve. The right of the reporter to protect his sources remains an undecided issue when it threatens the right of a fair trial. The First and Sixth Amendments confer on us all critical rights that are of equal importance. Each day in courtrooms, in judges' chambers, in newsrooms all across our land, these equal rights seem at times to conflict with each other. Members of the press and the bar together continue to develop methods and procedures to deal with these issues and jealously to defend those rights given us by our Constitution. It remains for us all to understand the issues involved and to assist both the press and the bar in their continuing efforts to resolve these issues without in any way diminishing the rights of the press to freely inform the public and the right of everyone to a fair trial.